Sarah Martinez stood at attention in the scorching heat of Fort Braxton, sweat beading down her forehead, as Drill Sergeant Thompson circled the recruits like a predator. The military training camp buzzed with the sounds of barked orders and heavy boots on concrete. Sarah had dreamed of this moment since she was 12 years old, watching her grandfather's war medals gleam in the sunlight streaming through their living room window. "Martinez!" Thompson's voice cut through the air like a whip. "What makes you think you belong here with the real soldiers?" Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes forward. She had heard this question a dozen times in her first week. At 5 feet 4 inches and barely 120 pounds, she looked nothing like the towering recruits surrounding her. Most of them had grown up hunting, wrestling, or playing football. Sarah had grown up in a small apartment above her mother's bakery, kneading dough and helping customers. "I'm here to serve my country, sir," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Thompson laughed, a harsh sound that made several recruits flinch. "Country? You can barely carry your own pack, girl. This isn't summer camp." The other recruit snickered, and Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. She had struggled with the physical demands, that much was true. The 50-pound rucksack felt like a boulder on her shoulders during their morning marches. Her push-ups were shaky, and she consistently finished last in their running drills. But there was something Thompson and the others didn't see. Something that burned quietly in Sarah's chest like an ember waiting for wind. She had a gift for patterns, for seeing things others missed. In her civilian life, she could spot a shoplifter from across her mother's bakery just by watching their movements. She noticed when regular customers were upset before they said a word, reading the subtle changes in their posture and expressions. During their first week of combat training, while other recruits focused on their weapons and stance, Sarah watched everything. She memorized the instructor's habits, the way they moved, where they looked. She noticed that Sergeant Williams always checked his watch before calling for water breaks. She saw how Private Jackson favored his left knee after long runs, even though he never complained. "Maybe you should consider a different career path," Thompson continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "The kitchen staff is always looking for help." Sarah bit back her response. Her grandfather had warned her about moments like this. "The military will test you in ways you can't imagine," he had told her the night before she left home. "They'll try to break you down to see what you're made of. Don't let them see you break, but don't let pride make you stupid either." That evening, as Sarah lay in her narrow bunk listening to the sounds of her fellow recruits settling in for the night, she pulled out a small notebook she kept hidden under her mattress. While others wrote letters home or studied their manuals, Sarah wrote observations. She documented training patterns, instructor behaviors, and tactical scenarios they had practiced. Her bunkmate, Katie Williams, rolled over and whispered, "You okay? Thompson was really laying into you today." Sarah nodded in the darkness. Katie was one of the few recruits who didn't treat her like a burden. She was tall and athletic, a former college basketball player who could outrun most of the men in their unit. "I know I'm not the strongest or fastest," Sarah whispered back. "But I belong here. I just need to prove it." "How are you going to do that?" Katie asked. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, listening to the sounds of the barracks around them. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear guards making their rounds, their boots echoing in a precise rhythm. "I'm still figuring that out." What Sarah didn't know was that her every move was being watched by someone far more important than Drill Sergeant Thompson. In a small office across the base, Colonel Marcus Webb sat studying surveillance footage from the training grounds. On his desk lay a thick file marked with a black viper symbol, a designation so classified that fewer than 20 people in the military knew of its existence. Colonel Webb had been watching Sarah Martinez for 3 weeks now, ever since a computer algorithm had flagged her psychological profile during routine screening. The Black Viper program was designed to identify individuals with exceptional observational skills, pattern recognition abilities, and the mental fortitude to operate in the most dangerous situations imaginable. Sarah's scores on spatial reasoning and tactical thinking tests had been off the charts, even though she had struggled with the physical requirements. More importantly, her behavior under pressure showed exactly the kind of calm analytical thinking the program desperately needed. Webb closed the file and glanced at his watch. Tomorrow would bring new challenges for the recruits, and he had a feeling Sarah Martinez was about to surprise everyone, including herself. The question was whether she would survive the process of discovering what she was truly capable of. As Sarah finally drifted off to sleep, she dreamed of her grandfather's medals again. But this time, in her dream, she was pinning a black viper pin to her own uniform while he watched with pride. The alarm screamed at 4:30 in the morning, just like every other day. Sarah rolled out of bed and began her routine. Boots laced, uniform pressed, bunk made with military corners so tight you could bounce a quarter off the blanket. But today felt different. There was electricity in the air that made her skin prickle with anticipation. "Listen up, maggots," Sergeant Thompson's voice boomed across the mess hall during breakfast. "Today we're doing something special. Urban warfare simulation in Building C. You'll be divided into teams and given a mission to complete." Sarah spooned her tasteless oatmeal and listened carefully. Urban warfare was where her observational skills might actually matter. She had spent countless hours studying floor plans and building layouts during her free time, memorizing exits and entry points like other people memorize song lyrics. "Martinez, Williams, Jackson, and Rodriguez, your red team," Thompson announced. Reading from his clipboard, Sarah noticed he deliberately assigned her to what looked like the weakest group. Jackson was still limping slightly from yesterday's obstacle course. Rodriguez was known for freezing under pressure, and while Katie was athletic, she had trouble with quick decision-making in combat scenarios. As they geared up with paintball equipment and tactical vests, Sarah pulled her team aside. "I know we look like the underdogs," she said quietly, "but that might work in our favor." Jackson snorted. "Easy for you to say. You're not the one who's going to get lit up by Blue Team's machine gunner." "That's exactly why we won't take the obvious routes," Sarah replied. She had spent her morning studying the building schematics posted in the briefing room. "Everyone expects us to fail, so they won't prepare for creative tactics." Katie raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" Before Sarah could answer, Sergeant Thompson's whistle pierced the air. "Move out! Red Team, you have 15 minutes to secure the package from the 3rd floor. Blue Team, your job is to stop them. Go." The abandoned office building loomed before them, its broken windows like dead eyes staring down at the training ground. Blue Team immediately spread out to cover the main entrances, taking positions that would give them clear lines of sight on anyone trying to enter. Sarah watched their deployment from behind a concrete barrier and smiled grimly. "They're doing exactly what I expected," she whispered to her team. "Covering the obvious entry points, so how do we get in?" Rodriguez asked, his voice tight with nerves. "We don't go in," Sarah said. "We go up." She pointed to a service ladder on the side of the building, partially hidden behind overgrown vegetation. It led to a maintenance platform that connected to a broken window on the 2nd floor. "The package is on the 3rd floor, but if we can get to the 2nd floor without being detected, we can use the internal stairs." "That ladder looks like it hasn't been used in years," Jackson protested. "Which is exactly why they won't be watching it," Sarah countered. Katie grinned. "I like it. Let's move." They crept along the building's perimeter using abandoned vehicles and debris for cover. Sarah's heart hammered as they reached the ladder, but her mind remained calm and focused. She had learned to trust her instincts, and every instinct told her this would work. Katie went first, her basketball-trained muscles making quick work of the climb. Rodriguez followed, then Jackson, moving carefully to avoid aggravating his knee. Sarah brought up the rear, constantly scanning for any sign that Blue Team had spotted them. The 2nd floor was a maze of cubicles and office furniture covered in dust and debris. Sarah motioned for silence and began moving toward the stairwell, but stopped when she heard voices echoing from above. "2 guards at the package location," she whispered. "And at least 1 more on the stairs between here and there." Rodriguez's face went pale. "We're trapped. If we go up, we get caught. If we go back down, we waste too much time." But Sarah was already studying the ceiling tiles above them. Many were missing or hanging loose, revealing the building's ductwork and support beams. "Katie, how much do you trust your climbing skills?" "Why?" Katie asked, though she was already looking up at the ceiling with interest. "Because we're going to take the route they'll never expect." Within minutes, Sarah had figured out how to remove a ceiling tile quietly. Katie boosted her up into the crawl space, then followed. The metal ductwork groaned under their weight but held firm. Sarah navigated through the darkness, using her mental map of the building to guide them toward the 3rd floor. The plan worked perfectly until they were directly above the package location. Sarah could hear Blue Team members talking below, confident in their defensive positions. But as she tried to find a ceiling tile to remove, her foot slipped on a loose piece of ductwork. The crash echoed through the building like a gunshot. "They're in the ceiling," someone shouted below. Sarah's mind raced. They had seconds before Blue Team would start firing paint rounds up through the ceiling tiles. "Katie, we need to move fast. Can you drop through that tile there and grab the package while I create a distraction?" What kind of distraction? Sarah was already army crawling toward the opposite side of the room, making as much noise as possible. Paint rounds began exploding through the ceiling tiles around her, covering her in bright blue splatters. But her plan worked. All attention was focused on her location while Katie dropped silently into the room near the package. "Got it," Katie whispered urgently. Now came the hardest part, getting out alive. Sarah had noticed something during their entry that might save them. The building's old fire escape was accessible through a window on this floor, and it would take them directly to the ground level behind Blue Team's positions. "Follow my voice," Sarah called to Katie, while paint rounds continued to pepper the ceiling around her. She began moving toward the fire escape window, staying low and using the ductwork for cover. They crashed through the window together, rolled onto the fire escape platform, and slid down to ground level in less than 30 seconds. By the time Blue Team realized what had happened, Red Team was already at the extraction point, mission complete. Sergeant Thompson stared at his stopwatch in disbelief. 14 minutes and 37 seconds. That's the fastest completion time we've ever recorded for this exercise. Sarah stood with her team, covered in dust and paint, trying to catch her breath. For the first time since arriving at Fort Braxton, she saw something different in the other recruits' eyes. Not dismissal or pity, but respect. What she didn't see was Colonel Webb standing in the shadows of a nearby building, speaking quietly into a secure radio. "The Martinez subject exceeded all expectations," he murmured. "I think it's time to move to the next phase." 3 days after the urban warfare exercise, everything changed for Sarah Martinez. She was cleaning her rifle in the armory when a corporal she had never seen before approached her table. "Private Martinez, Colonel Webb wants to see you in Building 7 immediately." Sarah's stomach dropped. Building 7 was administrative headquarters, the kind of place where recruits only went when they were in serious trouble or being discharged. She racked her brain trying to think of what she might have done wrong. Katie looked up from her own weapon cleaning. "What do you think that's about?" "Probably finally kicking me out," Sarah muttered, though she tried to sound more casual than she felt. "I'll see you at dinner." Building 7 was nothing like the stark training facilities Sarah had grown accustomed to. The floors were polished tile instead of concrete, and actual paintings hung on the walls instead of motivational posters. She felt severely underdressed in her standard-issue fatigues. Colonel Webb's office was on the 3rd floor, behind a door marked simply with his name and rank. Sarah knocked twice and waited for permission to enter. "Come in, Private Martinez." The man behind the desk was not what Sarah had expected. Colonel Webb looked to be in his early 40s, with graying hair and intense green eyes that seemed to see right through her. His uniform was pristine, but Sarah noticed small details that suggested he spent more time in the field than behind a desk. Calloused hands, a faint scar along his jaw, and boots that were well worn despite being perfectly polished. "Please, sit down," Webb said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. Sarah remained standing. "Sir, if this is about the training exercise, I can explain." "Relax, Private. You're not in trouble." Webb's voice carried an authority that made Sarah immediately sit down. In fact, quite the opposite. "Your performance this week has been remarkable." Sarah blinked in confusion. "Sir, with respect, I've been at the bottom of every physical fitness ranking since I arrived." "Physical fitness is only one measure of a soldier's capabilities," Webb replied. "Tell me, during the urban warfare simulation, how did you know Blue Team would position themselves exactly where they did?" The question caught Sarah off guard. I watched them during previous exercises. Everyone has patterns. Blue Team always takes the high ground and covers obvious entry points. It's good tactical thinking, but predictable." "And the ceiling route?" "I studied the building schematics during breakfast. Most people focus on ground-level movement, but buildings have 3 dimensions. Plus, the ductwork was clearly marked on the plans as load-bearing, so I knew it would support our weight." Webb leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah with those penetrating eyes. "How long did you spend memorizing those schematics?" "Maybe 10 minutes. They were posted right next to the coffee dispenser." 10 minutes, Webb repeated softly. "And you memorized enough detail to navigate through the ceiling in complete darkness." Sarah shifted uncomfortably. Is that unusual? Instead of answering, Webb opened a thick folder on his desk. Sarah could see pages of documents, but the writing was too small to read from where she sat. Private Martinez, what do you know about special operations? Basic stuff, sir. Elite units, classified missions, higher physical and mental standards than regular infantry. That's the common understanding, yes. But there are programs within special operations that most people never hear about. Programs that require very specific skill sets. Webb closed the folder and fixed Sarah with that intense stare again. Have you ever heard of pattern recognition specialists? Sarah shook her head. They're soldiers who can see things others miss. Read enemy movements, predict tactical decisions, identify threats that aren't immediately obvious. It's a rare gift and one that can't be taught through traditional training methods. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Why are you telling me this, sir? Because I believe you have that gift, Private Martinez, and I'd like to offer you an opportunity to develop it properly. Webb stood and walked to the window overlooking the training grounds. Sarah could see her fellow recruits running obstacle courses in the distance, looking like tiny figures from this height. What kind of opportunity? Sarah asked. Advanced training, small unit tactics, intelligence gathering, counter-surveillance techniques. You'd be working with some of the military's best instructors in disciplines most soldiers never encounter. It sounded too good to be true, which immediately made Sarah suspicious. What's the catch? Webb smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The catch is that this training is voluntary, but once you begin, you can't go back to regular infantry. You'd be committing to a very different kind of military career. Longer deployments, higher security clearances, missions that you could never discuss with family or friends. Sarah thought about her mother back home, working 14-hour days in the bakery to make ends meet. She thought about her grandfather's medals and the pride in his eyes when she had enlisted. Sir, I need to ask, is this because I'm not cut out for regular infantry? Are you trying to find a place for me where I won't be a liability? On the contrary, Webb said firmly. I'm offering this because your skills are too valuable to waste on standard combat roles. But I want to be clear about one thing. This program has a 90% dropout rate. The physical demands make regular basic training look easy, and the mental pressure is unlike anything most people can handle. Sarah stood up, her decision crystallizing. When would I start? Monday. But Private Martinez, Webb's voice carried a warning. Once you walk through those doors, everything changes. Your life, your relationships, your entire understanding of what it means to be a soldier. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? Sarah thought about Drill Sergeant Thompson's dismissive comments, about the looks of doubt from her fellow recruits, about all the times she had felt like she was trying to fit into a mold that wasn't designed for her. Then she thought about the moment in the ceiling, navigating by pure instinct and intelligence, feeling for the first time like she was exactly where she belonged. Yes, sir. I'm ready. Webb nodded and made a note in the folder. Report to Building 12 at 0500 Monday morning. Ask for Instructor Santos. And Private? Yes, sir. Don't tell anyone about this conversation. As far as your unit is concerned, you're being transferred for advanced tactical training. Nothing more. Sarah saluted and turned to leave, but Webb's voice stopped her at the door. One more thing. The program you're entering has a designation. Black Viper. You'll understand why once your training begins. As Sarah walked back across the base, her mind raced with questions and possibilities. She had no idea that in a secure communications room beneath Building 7, Colonel Webb was already placing an encrypted call to Fort Benning. The Martinez asset has agreed to Phase 2, he reported. Begin preparing the advanced training facility. And make sure Instructor Santos understands. This one might actually survive the full program. Monday morning arrived with the kind of bone-deep cold that made Sarah's teeth chatter despite her winter gear. Building 12 sat isolated from the main training facilities, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. A simple sign read, "Authorized personnel only" in stark black letters. Sarah approached the guard station at exactly 0500, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The MP on duty checked her identification twice before opening the gate. Building 12, room 101, he said curtly. Straight through those doors. The interior of Building 12 looked nothing like any military facility Sarah had ever seen. Instead of the utilitarian gray walls and fluorescent lighting she was accustomed to, the hallways were painted in earth tones and lit with soft, natural-looking bulbs. The floor was carpeted and she could hear classical music playing softly from hidden speakers. Room 101 turned out to be a comfortable conference room with a large wooden table and leather chairs. Sarah was examining a world map on the wall when the door opened behind her. "You must be Martinez." Sarah turned to see a woman in her mid-30s wearing civilian clothes, dark jeans, a black sweater, and hiking boots. She had short auburn hair and the kind of intense, focused expression Sarah had learned to associate with people who had seen combat. "Yes, ma'am. I'm looking for Instructor Santos," the woman smiled. "You found her. But call me Elena. We don't use ranks much in this program." She gestured for Sarah to sit down. "Coffee?" Sarah nodded, still trying to adjust to the casual atmosphere. Elena poured 2 cups from a thermos and sat across from her. "I've read your file," Elena said without preamble. "Impressive performance in the urban warfare exercise. Colonel Webb thinks you have potential for pattern recognition work." "I'm still not entirely sure what that means," Sarah admitted. "It means you see things other people miss, but more than that, you understand what those things mean and how to use that information." Elena pulled out a tablet and placed it on the table. "Let's start with a simple test." The tablet screen showed a photograph of a crowded marketplace in what looked like a Middle Eastern city. Men and women in traditional dress moved between colorful stalls selling fruit, textiles, and crafts. "Study this image for 30 seconds, Elena said. "Then tell me what you notice." Sarah examined the photograph carefully. At first it looked like any busy market scene, but as her eyes moved across the details, patterns began to emerge. The way people moved, where they looked, how they positioned themselves relative to each other. "Time," Elena said. Sarah looked up. "There's going to be trouble in the northwest corner of the market." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Explain." 3 men in dark jackets are converging on that area, but they're not shopping. They're keeping their hands free and watching the crowd instead of the merchandise. 2 women near the fruit stand have noticed them. They're backing away and looking for exits. And there's a vendor in that section who's already started packing up his goods even though it's clearly midday. "Anything else?" Sarah studied the image again. The man in the blue shirt by the spice stall is carrying something under his jacket. Wrong shape for a wallet or phone. And he's sweating even though everyone else looks comfortable. Elena made notes on a separate tablet. "How confident are you in this assessment?" "Very confident about the convergence and the suspicious behavior. The concealed object is harder to be certain about from a still photograph. This photo was taken in Kabul 3 minutes before a suicide bombing," Elena said matter-of-factly. "The man in the blue shirt was the bomber. The 3 men in dark jackets were undercover security forces who had identified the threat. You spotted all of this from a single image with 30 seconds of observation." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning temperature. "People died." 17 people died, 43 were injured. But it could have been much worse if the security forces hadn't been watching. Elena leaned forward. "This is what pattern recognition specialists do, Sarah. We identify threats before they fully materialize. We save lives by seeing danger that others miss." Over the next 4 hours, Elena put Sarah through a series of increasingly complex exercises. Surveillance photos from around the world, video footage of crowd movements, audio recordings of conversations in foreign languages where Sarah had to identify emotional states based purely on vocal patterns. With each test, Sarah felt something awakening in her mind. Skills she hadn't known she possessed began to sharpen and focus. It was like discovering she had been colorblind her entire life, and suddenly seeing the full spectrum. "Your natural ability is remarkable," Elena said during a lunch break, "but raw talent isn't enough for what we do. The real training starts tomorrow." "What kind of training?" "Physical conditioning designed specifically for surveillance and reconnaissance work. Language instruction. You'll need to be conversational in at least 3 languages besides English. Combat training focused on close-quarter situations and improvised weapons. And psychological preparation for operating in hostile environments where making the wrong decision gets people killed." Sarah absorbed this information, trying to imagine herself in those scenarios. "How long does the training take?" 18 months for basic certification, another year for advanced fieldwork qualification, and then you never really stop training. Elena studied Sarah's expression. "Having second thoughts?" "No," Sarah said without hesitation. "But I want to understand something. Why me?" "There must be other soldiers with pattern recognition abilities." Elena was quiet for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. There are others, but most of them burn out. The psychological pressure of constantly analyzing threats, of knowing that people's lives depend on your observations. It's overwhelming for most people. You need a very specific kind of mental resilience. And you think I have that? I think you've been developing that resilience your entire life without realizing it. Growing up in a small community, learning to read people's needs and emotions to help your mother's business succeed, taking care of others while managing your own challenges. These experiences created exactly the kind of psychological foundation we need. That afternoon, Elena introduced Sarah to the physical training component. It was unlike anything she had experienced in basic training. Instead of building raw strength and endurance, every exercise was designed to develop specific skills, moving silently across different terrain, maintaining situational awareness while under physical stress, and controlling her breathing and heart rate during high-pressure situations. Traditional military training prepares you to win fights, Elena explained, as Sarah practiced lockpicking techniques. Our training prepares you to avoid fights entirely. A good pattern recognition specialist completes most missions without anyone ever knowing she was there. By the end of the day, Sarah was exhausted but exhilarated. For the first time since joining the military, she felt like she was training for something that truly matched her abilities. Elena walked her back to the main gate as the sun set behind the training buildings. One more thing, Sarah. This program is classified at the highest levels. You can't discuss it with anyone. Not your family, not your friends from basic training, not even other military personnel unless they're specifically cleared. Can you handle that level of secrecy? Sarah thought about Katie and the other recruits she had grown close to, about the letters she wrote to her mother describing her training. It would mean living a carefully constructed lie for the rest of her military career. I can handle it, she said. Elena nodded. Good. Because tomorrow we start learning about the real purpose of the Black Viper program. And once you know what we really do, there's no going back. 6 weeks into her Black Viper training, Sarah Martinez felt like a completely different person. Her body had adapted to the specialized physical demands. She could now move through a building without making a sound, pick 3 different types of locks in under 2 minutes, and maintain perfect awareness of her surroundings even while focused on complex tasks. But it was the mental training that had truly transformed her. Elena had taught her to see layers of information that most people never noticed. The way someone's pupils dilated when they lied, how stress affected micro-expressions around the eyes and mouth, the subtle changes in posture that indicated when someone was carrying a concealed weapon. Today we're going to discuss the real mission of Black Viper operatives, Elena announced as they sat in the secure briefing room. Everything you've learned so far has been preparation for this conversation. Sarah straightened in her chair, sensing the gravity in Elena's tone. The official mission statement talks about pattern recognition and threat assessment, Elena continued. That's all true, but it's not the whole truth. Black Viper specialists are deployed in situations where traditional intelligence gathering has failed. We go places other agents can't go, see things other people can't see, and gather information that keeps the nation safe. Elena activated a large display screen on the wall. Images flashed by. Aerial photos of remote compounds, surveillance shots of suspicious meetings, maps marked with classified symbols. 3 months ago, intelligence agencies detected chatter about a planned attack on American soil. Something big, coordinated across multiple cities, but every attempt to infiltrate the organization behind it has failed. Their security is too tight, their operations too compartmentalized. Sarah studied the images, her trained mind automatically cataloging details and looking for patterns. So what's different about our approach? We don't try to infiltrate, Elena said. We observe. We watch from the shadows, track movement patterns, identify key players through their behavior, rather than their communications. It's slower than traditional intelligence work, but it's nearly impossible to detect. The screen changed to show a photograph of a busy coffee shop in what looked like downtown Washington, D.C. This location has been under surveillance for 2 weeks. We know it's a meeting point for members of the terrorist cell, but we haven't been able to identify who they are or when they meet. Sarah examined the image carefully. The coffee shop was modern and upscale, filled with the kind of young professionals who worked in government buildings and consulting firms throughout the capital. Nothing seemed obviously suspicious. "What have your observers reported?" Sarah asked. "Nothing useful? Too many variables, too much normal activity to separate signal from noise." Elena paused the display. "That's where you come in." "Me?" "Your final training exercise is a live mission. You'll spend 2 weeks conducting surveillance on this location, using everything you've learned to identify patterns that previous observers missed." Sarah felt her heart rate increase. A real mission? With actual targets? Under close supervision with multiple backup systems in place. But yes, this will be real intelligence gathering that could prevent a terrorist attack. Elena's expression grew serious. "Are you ready for that level of responsibility?" The question hung in the air between them. Sarah thought about all the mock scenarios they had practiced, all the theoretical discussions about life and death decisions. This was the moment when it became real. "I'm ready," she said. Elena nodded and handed her a thick briefing packet. "Your cover identity is established. You're a graduate student researching urban sociology patterns for your thesis. You'll spend several hours each day in or around the coffee shop, observing and documenting everything you see." Sarah opened the packet and found a complete fake identity. University enrollment records, a realistic thesis proposal, even a student ID card with her photo. This is incredibly detailed. It has to be. These people have killed federal agents who got too close. If they suspect your law enforcement, you won't get a chance to call for backup. Over the next 2 days, Elena and Sarah rehearsed every aspect of the mission: how to blend in with graduate students, how to take notes without appearing to conduct surveillance, how to communicate with handlers using coded text messages, and most importantly, how to recognize when a situation was becoming dangerous and she needed to extract immediately. "Remember," Elena said during their final briefing, "your job is to observe, not to intervene. Even if you identify the targets, even if you overhear them planning something specific, you do not take action. You report what you see and let others handle the response." On Monday morning, Sarah took the metro into downtown DC, carrying a laptop bag and wearing the kind of slightly rumpled clothes that screamed, "graduate student." She had studied maps of the area until she could navigate every street and alley from memory, identified 3 different escape routes, and memorized the locations of the nearest police stations and hospitals. The coffee shop, called Central Grounds, occupied the ground floor of a modern office building. Large windows provided excellent sight lines to the street, and the layout allowed someone to observe the entire interior from several different seating positions. Sarah ordered a latte and found a table near the back corner, where she could watch both the entrance and the counter area. She opened her laptop and began typing notes that would look like academic research to anyone glancing over her shoulder. For the first 3 days, she saw nothing unusual. The customer base was exactly what she expected. Government workers grabbing coffee before work, lobbyists meeting with clients, students from nearby universities studying for exams. She documented movement patterns, peak hours, regular customers, and staff behavior, but nothing triggered her trained instincts. On Thursday afternoon, everything changed. Sarah was reviewing her notes when 2 men entered the shop separately, ordered drinks, and sat at different tables. Neither looked suspicious individually. One was a well-dressed businessman in his 50s, the other a younger man in casual clothes who appeared to be working on a tablet. But something about their behavior made Sarah's pattern recognition training activate. They weren't looking at each other, weren't acknowledging each other's presence, but their movements were subtly synchronized. When the businessman checked his watch, the younger man closed his tablet. When the younger man got up to add sugar to his coffee, the businessman shifted his position to maintain visual contact. Sarah began observing more carefully, using her peripheral vision to track both men while appearing to focus on her laptop screen. After 40 minutes, a third person entered, a woman in her 30s wearing scrubs, as if she had just finished a shift at a nearby hospital. The woman ordered tea and sat at a table equidistant from both men. And then Sarah saw it, a pattern so subtle that she almost missed it despite all her training. Each person had positioned themselves to create a triangle in the seating area, with clear sight lines to all entrances and exits. They were conducting a surveillance meeting while maintaining the appearance of being random customers. Sarah's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to remain calm. She continued typing on her laptop while mentally cataloging every detail about the three individuals, their clothing, mannerisms, any distinguishing features. After another 20 minutes, all three people left the shop within a 5-minute window. But again, not together. Sarah waited exactly 15 minutes before sending her coded text message to Elena. Research progressing well. Found interesting social triangulation patterns. Will document thoroughly. The response came back within minutes. Excellent work. Continue observations tomorrow. That evening in the secure briefing room, Sarah provided a detailed report of what she had observed. Elena listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification about specific details. "You're certain about the positioning pattern?" Elena asked. "Absolutely. It wasn't random seating. They deliberately created overlapping fields of observation while maintaining plausible deniability." Sarah pulled out her notebook, where she had sketched the coffee shop layout, and marked the positions. And there was something else. The businessman kept touching his left wrist like he was activating something. Not checking the time, his watch was on his right wrist. Elena made notes on her tablet. Probably a recording device or communication system. Good catch. She looked up at Sarah with something that might have been pride. "This is exactly the kind of detail that previous observers missed. You've identified our targets. What happens now? Now we verify the pattern. If they meet again tomorrow at the same time, we'll know this is a regular occurrence. Then we start the really difficult work, identifying who they are and what they're planning." The next day, Sarah returned to Central Grounds with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had barely slept, running through scenarios and possibilities in her mind. Elena's words echoed in her thoughts. "Even if you overhear them planning something specific, you do not take action." At exactly 2:15 p.m., the businessman entered the coffee shop. Sarah felt a surge of validation. Her pattern recognition had been correct. The younger man arrived 7 minutes later, followed by the woman in scrubs at 2:28. But today something was different. As Sarah watched their careful dance of non-acknowledgement, she noticed the woman seemed agitated. Her movements were sharper, and she kept glancing toward the windows as if watching for something outside. Then Sarah saw why. A black SUV with government plates was parked across the street, and two men in dark suits were sitting inside, obviously conducting surveillance of their own. The terrorist cell had been made, and they knew it. Sarah watched in growing horror as the three targets began to recognize the threat. The businessman's hand moved to his left wrist repeatedly. The younger man closed his tablet and started to stand. The woman's eyes swept the coffee shop, and for one terrifying moment, her gaze lingered on Sarah. Sarah forced herself to keep typing, to maintain her cover even as adrenaline flooded her system. But she could see the situation deteriorating rapidly. The three operatives were preparing to scatter, and once they did, the intelligence agencies might lose track of them completely. Worse, Sarah realized that if the cell felt compromised, they might accelerate whatever attack they were planning. The careful surveillance and intelligence gathering could backfire catastrophically. The woman stood up abruptly and walked toward the exit, but instead of leaving, she stopped at Sarah's table. "Excuse me," she said in a voice that sounded perfectly friendly but carried an undertone that made Sarah's skin crawl. "I couldn't help but notice you're here every day. Are you working on something interesting?" Sarah looked up with what she hoped was a confused graduate student expression. "Oh, just my thesis research. Pretty boring stuff about urban social patterns." The woman smiled, but her eyes remained cold and calculating. "Social patterns. How fascinating. I'd love to hear more about your research sometime." She walked away before Sarah could respond, but the message was clear. They had identified her as a potential threat. Sarah waited exactly 10 minutes before gathering her things and leaving the coffee shop. Her hands shook slightly as she packed her laptop, but she forced herself to move with the unhurried pace of a student who had simply finished her work for the day. Once outside, she resisted every instinct that screamed at her to run. Instead, she walked to the nearest metro station at a normal pace, constantly aware of her surroundings but trying not to appear paranoid. It wasn't until she was safely on the train that she allowed herself to send the emergency extraction code. Research complete. Returning to campus immediately. The response was instant. Understood. Report to secure location immediately upon arrival. As the metro carried her back to base, Sarah stared at her reflection in the darkened window, and realized that everything Elena had told her about the psychological pressure of this work was true. For 18 months, she had been training for moments like this. But nothing could have prepared her for the reality of looking into the eyes of someone who would kill her without hesitation if they discovered her true purpose. But she had done it. She had identified the targets, gathered crucial intelligence, and extracted safely when the situation became compromised. For the first time since joining the military, Sarah truly understood what she was capable of, and she was ready for whatever came next. The secure debriefing room felt different when Sarah returned from her mission. The comfortable atmosphere she had grown accustomed to during training was replaced by an urgent energy that made her realize just how serious the situation had become. Colonel Webb was waiting when she arrived, along with Elena and 2 other people Sarah had never seen before, a stern-looking woman in a Navy uniform, and a man in civilian clothes who had the unmistakable bearing of intelligence services. "Sit down, Sarah," Colonel Webb said, his tone more serious than she had ever heard it. "We need to hear everything." For the next 2 hours, Sarah recounted every detail of her surveillance operation. She described the positioning patterns, the synchronized movements, the recording device she suspected the businessman was using, and finally, the moment when their cover was blown and she was approached by the woman in scrubs. "You're certain she identified you as a threat?" the civilian asked. "She knew I didn't belong. Whether she suspected I was law enforcement or just thought I was suspicious, I can't say for certain. But her approach was definitely a probe." The Navy officer leaned forward. "Describe her voice. Any accent, speech patterns, anything distinctive?" Sarah closed her eyes and replayed the brief conversation. No obvious accent, but her English was very precise, like someone who learned it as a second language but speaks it perfectly. And she emphasized certain words in a way that felt like she was testing my reactions. Elena made notes on her tablet. "That matches the profile we've been developing. We think she's the operational coordinator for the cell." Colonel Webb opened a folder and spread several photographs across the table. "Do any of these match the people you observed?" Sarah studied the images carefully. They were surveillance photos taken in various locations: airports, train stations, office buildings. After a few minutes, she pointed to 3 pictures. "These are them. But these photos are much older, probably at least 2 years. They all look different now. The businessman has gained weight and changed his hair. The younger man has a beard now. And the woman's hair is completely different. That's why traditional surveillance failed," the civilian said grimly. "They've been systematically altering their appearances and changing their patterns. Your behavioral observation was the first breakthrough we've had. What happens now?" Sarah asked. The room fell silent for a moment, and Sarah sensed that the adults were exchanging meaningful looks above her head. Finally, Colonel Webb spoke. "The cell has been compromised, which means they'll likely accelerate their timeline. We have maybe 72 hours before they either execute their plan or disappear completely. Based on the intelligence you gathered," Elena added, "we've been able to identify 2 other locations where they've been conducting similar meetings. The FBI is setting up surveillance at those sites right now." The Navy officer pulled out her own tablet and showed Sarah a map of the Washington, D.C. area with several locations marked in red. "We think they're targeting multiple government buildings simultaneously. Your observation about the recording device was crucial. We now know they've been documenting security procedures and personnel movements." Sarah stared at the map, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. "You mean the attack I helped identify could happen in the next few days?" "It's possible," Colonel Webb said. "But because of your work, we're not going in blind anymore. We know who to look for, we know their operational patterns, and we have a much better chance of stopping them." The civilian stood up and extended his hand to Sarah. "I'm Deputy Director Morrison, CIA. I wanted to personally thank you for your work on this operation. Your observations have likely saved hundreds of lives." Sarah shook his hand, still trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. "I was just doing what I was trained to do." "No," Elena said firmly. "You were doing what very few people can do. Pattern recognition at your level is extremely rare, and the ability to maintain cover under pressure is even rarer." Colonel Webb gathered the photographs and closed his folder. "Which brings us to your next assignment." Sarah looked up in surprise. "Next assignment? The Black Viper program isn't a single mission, Sarah. It's a career track. Over the next 18 months, you'll be deployed on increasingly complex operations around the world. Intelligence gathering, threat assessment, sometimes working alone in hostile territory for weeks at a time. Are you ready for that? Elena asked. Sarah thought about the woman in scrubs, about the cold calculation in her eyes, about the knowledge that hundreds of innocent people might die if she and others like her failed in their missions. It was terrifying and overwhelming, but it was also exactly what she had been searching for since the day she enlisted. "I'm ready," she said. 3 days later, Sarah stood in a small ceremony room in Building 7, wearing her dress uniform and feeling more nervous than she had during any training exercise. Her mother had flown in from home along with her grandfather, who was now 86 and walked with a cane but insisted on attending. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colonel Webb announced to the small group assembled, "today we recognize the exceptional service and dedication of Specialist Sarah Martinez." Sarah felt her heart skip as Colonel Webb approached with a small black box. Inside was a pin unlike any military decoration she had ever seen. A sleek black viper coiled in a striking position, with tiny silver eyes that seemed to gleam in the fluorescent light. The Black Viper designation is awarded to fewer than 50 active service members worldwide, Webb said as he pinned it to her uniform. It represents excellence in pattern recognition, intelligence gathering, and covert operations. Wear it with pride. Sarah's grandfather stepped forward, tears in his eyes. "I always knew you were special, little one. But this..." He reached out to touch the pin with a trembling finger. "This is something beyond what I ever imagined. What does it mean?" her mother asked. Sarah looked at Elena, who nodded slightly. "It means I'm qualified for advanced intelligence work, Mom. I'll be helping to keep people safe." Her mother hugged her tightly. "I'm so proud of you. Your father would have been proud too." Later, after her family had returned home and the ceremony was over, Sarah found herself walking across the base with Elena as the sun set behind the training buildings. "Any regrets?" Elena asked. Sarah considered the question seriously. Her life had changed completely in just a few months. She would never again be able to discuss her work with family or friends. Her missions would take her to dangerous places where making the wrong decision could cost lives. She would spend years living carefully constructed lies to protect her cover identity. But she thought about the terrorist cell that was now in FBI custody, about the attack that had been prevented, about the innocent people who would go home safely to their families because of intelligence she had helped gather. "No regrets?" she said firmly. "This is exactly where I belong," Elena smiled. "Good, because your next assignment starts Monday. We're sending you to Eastern Europe to track an arms dealer who's been selling weapons to terrorist organizations. Think you're ready for international work?" Sarah touched the black Viper pin on her uniform and felt the same sense of rightness she had experienced in the coffee shop, in the ceiling of the urban warfare building, in every moment when her unique abilities had made the difference between success and failure. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." As they walked back toward the main base, Sarah realized that Drill Sergeant Thompson had been wrong about one thing. She did belong here with the real soldiers. She had just needed to find the right kind of soldier to become.